The summer heat was beginning to settle over the small town of Cold Creek, Virginia. With its old brick buildings and quiet, tree-lined streets, it felt like time had forgotten this place. For Emma Blake, that was exactly what she wanted. After the sudden death of her younger brother, Daniel, Emma had left her apartment in Chicago and moved to Cold Creek temporarily to recover from the grief. Her aunt had passed away a year earlier and left behind a small cottage just outside of town, modest, creaky, and packed with decades of forgotten memories. It was the kind of place where silence hung in the air like dust in sunlight. Emma tried to distract herself from the constant ache in her chest by cleaning the cottage and exploring town. On one of her errands into Cold Creek's old market district, she stumbled into a dim little antique shop squeezed between a hardware store and a florist. The sign hanging above the door simply read Wren's Curiosities. The shop smelled of old wood and lavender, filled with furniture, dolls, clocks, and strange artifacts from generations long gone. She wasn't really looking for anything, but something drew her toward the back corner of the store. A large mirror leaning against the wall, half covered in a dusty sheet. It was beautiful in an eerie sort of way. The frame was dark wood, carved with twisting vines and eyes. Yes, tiny, elegant carvings of watching eyes. The glass was slightly aged, creating a soft, smoky reflection. Emma hesitated. There was something unsettling about the mirror, but also something magnetic. It made her heart beat faster in a way she couldn't explain. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with silver hair and cloudy blue eyes, noticed her interest. "Beautiful piece, isn't it?" he said. "Came from an estate up north. Old family. No one wanted to keep it." Emma looked at the mirror again. "How old is it?" "Older than it looks. They say it belonged to a spiritualist. One of those seance types. Early 1800s, I believe." She nearly walked away. But then the man added, "Funny thing, people say mirrors like that were used to see more than your reflection." Emma paused. Something stirred in her. Grief, curiosity, desperation, it was all a blur. How much? By that afternoon, the mirror was in the hallway of the cottage, across from the guest bedroom. Emma placed it there mostly because it fit the space. She tried not to think about the eyes carved into its wooden frame or the way it seemed to reflect more shadow than light. The days that followed were quiet. She spent them reading in the garden, cleaning out old boxes, and trying to sleep through nights filled with dreams of her brother calling her name. But always, the mirror was there. Whenever she passed it, she felt the urge to look at it, sometimes for just a second too long. On the fourth night, Emma stood in front of the mirror before bed. She had just brushed her teeth and turned off the lights. The only illumination came from the hallway lamp, casting a golden glow on the wood floor. Her reflection looked normal, tired, pale, but otherwise unchanged. Then she noticed something strange. In the background of the reflection, something moved. Just a flicker. She turned around quickly. Nothing. The hallway was empty. She looked back into the mirror, still nothing. "Get it together," she muttered, rubbing her eyes. She walked to bed, heart beating faster than it should have. She didn't tell herself she had seen anything. It was just stress, lack of sleep, normal grief responses. But as she lay under the covers and stared at the ceiling, the image kept coming back to her mind, the brief movement, the strange shimmer of light behind her reflection. In the silence of the night, she began to wonder what exactly had she brought into her home. The following morning, the mirror stood quiet as ever, showing nothing but the hallway behind Emma and the soft, dusty air that lingered in the cottage. She stared at it while sipping her coffee, half expecting something unusual to happen again, but nothing did. Days went by. Emma tried to distract herself with chores and long walks in the woods behind the house. She read from old paperbacks her aunt had left behind. But her mind kept drifting back to the mirror. It became a routine. She would glance at it every time she passed, and every now and then she would stop, just for a moment, to study the reflection. At first, the changes were subtle. Shadows moved just a fraction too late. The reflection sometimes showed the light bulbs flickering when they weren't. A coat hanging on a wall hook behind her would appear twisted in the mirror, almost like a person. She convinced herself it was just stress, that her brain was tricking her. After all, grief plays tricks. That's what every article said. But things started getting weirder. One afternoon, Emma was coming out of the guest bedroom when she caught a clear movement in the mirror. It was fast, like someone stepping around a corner. She spun around, but there was no one there, just silence. Her pulse quickened. She walked toward the mirror slowly, heart pounding in her chest. In the glass, everything looked normal again. That night, the dreams returned. She was standing in the hallway in front of the mirror, staring into it. But instead of her reflection, she saw her brother, Daniel. He was wearing the hoodie he had on the day he died, a dark gray one with a tear on the shoulder. He didn't speak. He just stared at her with wide, sad eyes. Then, as she reached out to him, the glass cracked, a single thin line cutting across his face, and she woke up. The next morning, Emma didn't want to look at the mirror. But of course she did. No cracks. No Daniel. Just her pale reflection and the empty hallway. The next incident was harder to dismiss. Emma was on the phone with her friend Megan, who lived back in Chicago. She had just begun explaining her restless nights when a loud bang echoed from the hallway. Emma dropped the phone and ran out. The mirror had fallen face down. Shards of wood from the frame had cracked off, and one of the eyes carved into the edge was broken clean through. But the mirror itself hadn't shattered. That was impossible. She had hardwood floors. A fall like that should have at least cracked the glass. A chill ran down her spine. She picked the mirror up slowly, leaning it against the wall again. When she looked into it, she saw herself, but behind her, the hallway looked darker than usual, almost like it was dusk, even though the afternoon sun still poured in through the windows. From that day forward, things grew worse. The temperature in the hallway dropped noticeably. No matter how high she turned up the thermostat, the area around the mirror was always cold. The lights would flicker randomly, but only when she was near the mirror. Once, she tried covering it with a blanket. That night, she heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate steps pacing back and forth. When she got up to check, the blanket was on the floor. The mirror was uncovered again. The most terrifying moment happened one evening when Emma was brushing her teeth. The door to the hallway was open just slightly. Out of the corner of her eye, in the reflection of the bathroom mirror, she saw movement in the hallway mirror. It was a hand, pale, slow-moving, gliding across the inside of the glass. She rushed out to the hallway. Nothing. No hand. Just her breath coming out in shaky gasps and her reflection staring back at her with wild eyes. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat on the couch with every light in the cottage on, staring at the hallway. It was no longer just strange reflections. Something had begun to bleed through the mirror. Something watching. Waiting. The wind howled through the trees outside the cottage that night, rattling the windows as if trying to get in. Emma sat curled up on the living room couch, wrapped in a blanket, too frightened to sleep. Her eyes kept drifting toward the hallway where the mirror stood like a sentinel in the dark, catching just enough of the ambient light to reflect a soft, eerie glow. She had tried convincing herself for days that everything she was seeing was a product of stress, exhaustion, or perhaps the raw ache of losing her brother. But something inside her had shifted. She no longer doubted that the mirror was different. It was no ordinary object, it was a presence. That night, around 2:13 a.m., it happened. She had finally dozed off, head resting against the arm of the couch, when a soft creaking noise pulled her back to consciousness. She opened her eyes, dazed. The room was still, but the hallway light had flickered off. Only moonlight spilled in from the window. Then she heard a whisper. So faint it could have been the wind. But it wasn't. It came from the hallway directly in front of the mirror. Emma, her heart leapt. That voice? It wasn't just anyone, it was Daniel. She knew it deep in her bones. She stood slowly, legs shaky, and took cautious steps toward the hallway. The floorboards groaned beneath her feet. The air grew colder with every step. She reached the edge of the hallway and peered around the corner. The mirror stood quietly, reflecting the dim shape of the hallway behind her, and then something shifted. In the mirror's glass, she saw a figure standing directly behind her reflection. Her breath caught. It was him. Daniel. He looked the same as the last time she saw him, tousled brown hair, soft features, the gray hoodie. His expression was calm but full of sorrow. He didn't move, just stood there, staring into her eyes through the reflection. She turned around, hoping, praying, but the hallway was empty. She looked back into the mirror. He was still there. Daniel, she whispered, reaching a trembling hand toward the glass. Her fingers met the cold surface. It felt normal, smooth, lifeless, but the image didn't disappear. His lips parted slightly, and he seemed to be saying something. She leaned closer. But there was no sound. Say it again, she said, voice cracking. His mouth moved slowly, deliberately. She could almost make out the words, "You need to listen." A sudden gust of icy air rushed through the hallway, nearly knocking her backward. The lights flickered once, twice, then went dark entirely. In that instant, Daniel's image disappeared. Emma stood frozen, her hands still touching the mirror, breath fogging up the glass. The hallway was silent once again. She staggered back into the living room and sank to the floor, hands shaking, chest heaving. Tears welled in her eyes, not just from fear, but from the deep, agonizing rush of emotion that came from seeing her brother again, even if it was through something unnatural. The next morning, she didn't tell anyone. Who would believe her? Even she wasn't sure if what she saw was real or a hallucination born from months of grief. But as the sun rose over the trees and filled the cottage with warm light, she knew one thing for certain. She had seen Daniel. He was trying to reach her. And the mirror was the key. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at her untouched cup of tea, the weight of what had happened pressing down on her. She had questions, so many but no answers. Why was he trying to contact her? What did he mean by, "You need to listen"? And if he could appear, what else could? Because now, the mirror wasn't just showing glimpses. It was opening something much deeper. The next few days passed in a blur of unease and obsession. Emma avoided the mirror during the day, but when night fell, she found herself drawn back to it, watching, waiting, hoping for another glimpse of Daniel. Yet nothing happened. The mirror returned to its usual eerie silence, its surface reflecting only the hallway and her own tired, restless face. Her grief now had company. Curiosity. Emma needed to know what the mirror was and how it worked. It wasn't just a family heirloom or a creepy antique. It was a window or maybe a door. And if her brother's spirit had used it to contact her, she needed to understand how and why. The antique shop where she had bought the mirror, Wren's Curiosities, was her first stop. The old man behind the counter looked up as she entered. His pale blue eyes narrowed slightly like he knew she'd be back. "Something wrong with the mirror?" he asked, as if expecting the question. Emma hesitated. "It shows things. People. Someone who's not there." He said nothing at first, just studied her quietly, then motioned her to follow him to a room in the back. The storage area smelled of mildew and old books. From a cluttered wooden shelf, the man pulled out a thick leather-bound journal and handed it to her. "Came with the mirror," he said. "Most people don't care to know the story behind what they buy. But you look like someone who might." Emma opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was old-fashioned and ornate, dated back to 1836. It belonged to a woman named Eleanor Glass, a self-proclaimed spiritualist who had traveled the East Coast conducting seances and speaking with the dead. She claimed the mirror was a vessel built under specific rituals, crafted from obsidian mixed with silver, and blessed, or cursed, by a ritual of mourning. According to the journal, Eleanor didn't use the mirror to summon the dead. Instead, it showed those who were already trying to come through. Lost souls trapped between worlds, unable to move on. Emma read one line again and again. "The mirror does not lie, but it will never show all. It grants vision to the grieving and speaks to those it chooses. But beware, not every spirit seeks peace." She felt a chill reading that. On impulse, she asked, "Has anyone else ever seen someone in it? A loved one?" The shopkeeper nodded slowly. "A woman bought it 20 years ago, brought it back a month later, said her husband had spoken to her through it. Then other things started showing up. Screaming, scratches on the walls. She said she saw faces in every reflection, even outside the mirror." "What happened to her?" Emma asked. He looked at her grimly. "She was never the same." Emma left the shop with the journal tucked under her arm and her thoughts spinning. That night, she lit a dozen candles around the mirror. The light danced in the reflection, giving the hallway an almost otherworldly glow. She sat cross-legged on the floor in front of it, the journal in her lap. Eleanor's words whispered from the pages, guiding her through what the woman had called a mirror rite, a meditative practice to reach the other side. Emma closed her eyes, breathing slowly, focusing not on the mirror itself but on Daniel. His laugh, his face, the music he used to blast through his headphones. She whispered his name. "Daniel, if you're still here, I'm listening." The mirror stayed still at first. Then the surface shimmered ever so slightly, like heat rising from pavement. She opened her eyes. In the reflection, Daniel appeared again. But this time he wasn't alone. Behind him stood something else, blurry, shadowed, half-hidden in the dark. Its shape was human, but its eyes were hollow and its face flickered like a dying flame. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Daniel mouthed something again. This time she read the words more clearly. "Don't trust it." The candles suddenly blew out, plunging the hallway into darkness. Emma screamed, stumbling away from the mirror, her heart racing. She flipped on the lights. The reflection was gone. Just her, alone, staring at herself in the glass. She now knew two things: Daniel was trapped. And something else, something far more dangerous, was watching. Emma no longer questioned the mirror's power. It was real. Too real. And with each passing night, its pull on her grew stronger. After the second time Daniel appeared with that shadowy figure lingering nearby, Emma couldn't let go. She became consumed with learning how to communicate with him again, even if it meant inviting danger. She kept Eleanor Glass's journal at her side like a lifeline, scribbling notes, underlining phrases, trying to understand what the mirror wanted, what the spirits needed. Each night, she lit candles and recited Eleanor's rites. Sometimes the mirror remained blank. Other times, it stirred with movement like wind brushing through fog. Then one night, Daniel returned. He stood closer this time. His eyes were clearer, his mouth moving with greater urgency. "Emma, you have to let me go," he mouthed. "You're keeping it open." Emma's chest tightened. "I don't understand. I'm not doing anything. I'm just trying to help you." His face changed, eyes full of sorrow, but also fear. "You're not alone anymore," he said. The reflection shifted. Behind Daniel, another spirit appeared. A woman in a long black dress with her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her eyes glowed faintly, and her mouth moved, but no sound emerged. Then, beside her, came a child, a boy, maybe 10 years old, barefoot, staring blankly at Emma through the mirror. They weren't frightening, just lost. In the days that followed, more began to appear. Some would simply stand in the background, watching. Others would whisper so faintly Emma could barely understand, but their voices layered over each other like static, cries for help, muttered regrets, pleas to be heard. Emma became their audience. She stopped sleeping at night. Her days blurred into long hours spent in front of the mirror, taking notes, sketching faces, writing down names she didn't recognize. She no longer left the house. Megan called, but Emma ignored the calls. No one would believe her. No one would understand. One evening, as the sky outside turned dark with an incoming storm, Emma heard her name whispered, not through the mirror, but from the air itself. She turned sharply. The mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water. Then she saw Daniel again. But something was wrong. His eyes were different, empty, wide. His mouth didn't move like before. It opened slowly, unnaturally wide. "Emma," he said, but his voice wasn't his. It was distorted, deeper, layered with something inhuman. Emma gasped and stepped back. Behind Daniel, the shadows grew. Dozens of them. The spirits she'd seen earlier, the woman in the dress, the boy, now moved oddly, jerkily, as if being controlled like puppets. She slammed the blanket over the mirror, heart pounding. The whispers stopped. Silence. She fled to the kitchen, hands trembling, her mind reeling with confusion and fear. Something was changing. The mirror was no longer just a window for spirits seeking peace. It had become a beacon for all spirits. And some of them were using Daniel to get closer to her. That night, she tried burning sage. Sprinkled salt around the mirror's base. Old rituals she found online. None of it worked. Later, unable to resist, she returned and pulled the blanket off. A woman she had never seen before now stood in the mirror. Middle-aged, pale, face wet with tears. She mouthed the words, "Help me," over and over. Emma whispered softly, "Who are you?" But there was no answer. Just her lips moving, her eyes pleading. More came each night. Some silent, some sobbing. One man stood with a rope around his neck. Another appeared only as a shadow that stretched its hand toward the glass. Emma wrote down everything, trying to make sense of the chaos. But amidst the desperation, a pattern began to form. Daniel stopped appearing as frequently. And when he did, his presence was dimmer, fading, as if he were losing himself. One night, she finally asked the mirror out loud, "Am I helping you? Or am I making this worse?" The mirror shimmered. For a moment, Daniel appeared again, eyes full of pain. He mouthed 3 words, "It's feeding now." The mirror wasn't just a tool. It wasn't even a doorway anymore. It was hungry. And Emma was keeping it alive. By now, Emma was living in shadows. The mirror had taken over everything, her days, her nights, her mind. Her body had grown thin, her eyes hollow. The once cozy cottage now felt like a haunted relic, soaked in cold air and lingering voices that seemed to creep in even when the mirror was covered. She didn't eat much. She barely slept. Every corner of the house reminded her of what she had seen, faces in reflections, whispers from vents, lights flickering without cause. Even outside, in the woods surrounding the property, she felt eyes on her, as if something had spilled beyond the frame of the mirror and taken root in the world. But now she had a goal: understand what the mirror was. Eleanor Glass's journal hinted that the mirror was crafted with intention. A sacred object. A vessel made for communication. But Emma began to suspect that the truth was darker than anything the journal had described. So she dug deeper. She called a historian of American occult artifacts, pretending to be a grad student working on a thesis. The woman she spoke to, Dr. Harriet Vale, was skeptical until Emma mentioned Eleanor Glass and the term ritual of mourning. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Where did you hear that phrase?" Dr. Vale asked, her tone sharp. Emma hesitated, then said, "In a journal, left behind with a mirror." There was another pause. Then, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. If that mirror is real, you need to get rid of it." Immediately, Emma asked why. Dr. Vale's answer chilled her to the bone. There was a small group of occult practitioners in the early 1800s who believed that death was not an end but a boundary. They didn't just grieve their loved ones, they tried to anchor them. They believed mirrors could bind souls to the living world by creating emotional links. But these mirrors weren't harmless, they were traps. Designed to lure in not only loved ones but anything else that wandered too close. Emma said nothing. Her mouth had gone dry. These objects became known as death mirrors, Dr. Vale continued. They don't show the dead, they collect them. And when they have enough energy, they begin to leak. Emma hung up shortly after, too shaken to say more. That night, she sat across from the mirror and stared into its depths. The glass shimmered again, and Daniel appeared, faint now, barely visible. He looked weak, like a memory being erased. She cried, "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted to see you again." He mouthed something. She leaned in. "Set it free." The phrase echoed in her mind. She flipped through Eleanor's journal again, searching for any reference to destroying the mirror. But there was nothing. The entries stopped suddenly. The last page was smeared as if Eleanor had spilled ink or blood across it. Emma slammed the book shut and stood. The mirror's surface shifted once more. This time, Daniel wasn't alone. The shadows returned, stronger now. Dozens of them. Silent figures pressed against the glass, their hands reaching out, their mouths wide with silent screams. Behind them, the mirror darkened, its depth becoming infinite, like a well into another world. Then, for the first time, the mirror spoke. Not in words. In feeling. Emma's chest tightened, like pressure from the inside out. Her ears rang. Her head throbbed. She couldn't move. The air turned to ice. The candle flames around the room flickered, then extinguished one by one. The mirror was awake. It wasn't showing the dead anymore. It was becoming them. Emma collapsed to her knees, breathless, her vision blurring. As she struggled to stand, she caught a final glimpse in the mirror, a flash of her own reflection, but the eyes weren't hers. They were pitch black. And they smiled. It was feeding. And it wanted more. Emma knew, finally, the mirror's purpose wasn't to help the grieving. It was to consume them. Emma spent the next day in silence. No phone, no music, no candles. Just the sound of the wind brushing against the windows and the low creaks of the old house settling around her. She didn't go near the mirror. She didn't even cover it. It sat there at the end of the hallway, pulsing faintly like a living thing, its presence inescapable. She had seen enough. And now she understood. She had to destroy it. The decision wasn't easy. In the beginning, the mirror had brought her Daniel. Or what she believed was Daniel. It had comforted her in her worst grief, given her hope when she had nothing left. But the longer she used it, the more she realized Daniel wasn't free. None of them were. They were all prisoners. And she had become their warden. She gathered tools, a sledgehammer from the shed, matches, a metal container of lighter fluid from the garage. She didn't know if smashing the glass would work or if it would make things worse, but fire seemed like her best option. If it truly was a spiritual anchor, it needed to be cleansed in the most absolute way. But deep down, she was terrified. She sat at the kitchen table, hammer resting beside her, her fingers wrapped tightly around a photograph of Daniel. She whispered, "I'm sorry. I hope this sets you free." As dusk fell, the mirror began to hum. It wasn't a sound she could hear clearly, it was more like a vibration in her chest, a pulsing under the floorboards. She approached the hallway slowly, holding the hammer with both hands. The mirror shimmered brighter than ever before, swirling like black ink under the surface. Figures pressed against the glass again. Dozens. No, hundreds. Some human. Some barely shaped. Some monstrous. All watching her. Daniel stood at the front. He looked more solid now, more himself, but his eyes were full of urgency. He mouthed, "Now. Before it's too late." Emma raised the hammer. The mirror reacted instantly. The surface pulsed outward, as if trying to stop her. A deafening screech rang through the house, coming from nowhere and everywhere. The air turned thick. Her vision blurred. She screamed and brought the hammer down. The glass cracked, but didn't shatter. Again, she struck it harder. More cracks. The figures inside the mirror began to contort and twist, some screaming in silence, some vanishing entirely. The surface buckled and pulsed like skin. She pulled the lighter fluid from her bag and doused the frame and base, then flicked a match and dropped it. The fire erupted immediately. The mirror wailed. A hideous, unnatural sound like metal grinding against bone. Shadows burst from its surface, streaking up the walls, across the ceiling, into the corners of the house. The figures screamed as the fire climbed the frame. The glass warped, melting, the reflection turning into a whirlpool of darkness and fire. Emma stumbled back, shielding her face from the heat. Then everything went still. The glass exploded outward with a burst of blinding light. The hallway went silent. Emma lay there, covered in soot and shards of mirror, chest heaving. When the smoke cleared, all that remained of the mirror was a blackened frame and smoldering ashes. The house was dead quiet. No whispers. No reflections. No Daniel. Just silence. She waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. She called out to him once, twice, but no one answered. She realized what she had done. She had broken the bond. He was gone. A wave of grief washed over her again, deeper than before, but this time it felt right. Natural. Unassisted. Human. She cried not because she was haunted, but because she was healing. For the first time since his death, she wasn't trying to bring Daniel back. She was finally letting him go. Weeks passed. The mirror was gone. The frame had been reduced to ash, and the remaining fragments of glass were buried deep in the forest behind Emma's cottage. She said a quiet goodbye as she poured soil over them, whispering Daniel's name like a prayer. For the first time in months, she slept through the night. The house, once thick with cold and shadows, began to feel like a home again. Light reached into corners it hadn't touched in years. Birds returned to perch near the windows. The air inside the rooms didn't buzz with energy anymore, it was calm still. Peaceful. Emma slowly resumed life. She called Megan and apologized for her distance. She went into town and stocked up on groceries. She even picked up her camera again and took pictures of the surrounding forest, the birds, the sky. Her eyes were no longer fixed on the past, they were open to what remained. But something lingered. Every now and then, she'd glance at a polished surface. A window, a puddle, the black screen of her TV, and feel the hairs on her neck stand up. She told herself it was just her nerves. Ghosts of memory, not actual spirits. She even started seeing a grief counselor, who encouraged her to write about her experiences. Emma told her it had all been symbolic. A mirror of mourning, she called it. A metaphor for how people cling to the dead. The counselor nodded but said something that stuck with her. Sometimes, letting go isn't about forgetting the dead. It's about releasing what's still holding you. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She wandered the house, touching the walls, running her fingers along the hallway where the mirror had stood. It looked so empty now, like a scar that had faded, but not fully healed. She paused in front of the blank wall, and then she saw it. In the shine of the hallway floor, a faint shimmer, a ripple like a breath against glass. Emma froze. She knelt, looking closer. Her own reflection stared back at her. But something was wrong. Her eyes blinked a second too late. Her smile appeared before her lips moved. And behind her, in the reflected world, someone was standing. Daniel. Not the pale, ghostly version. Not the fading image. But Daniel as he had looked in life. Whole. Calm. Watching her with a quiet, knowing look. Emma stood, heart-thudding. Daniel, she whispered. No response. She looked again. The reflection was normal now. Just her. No shimmer, no figure. She backed away, unsettled. Was her mind playing tricks on her? Had the mirror really been destroyed? Or had she simply weakened it? The next morning, she contacted Dr. Harriet Vale again and explained everything, what she had done, what she thought she saw. Dr. Vale listened patiently, then said something chilling. If you destroyed the object, that's good. But be aware mirrors are not the source. They're just vessels. What you saw, what you opened, may find another way. Emma didn't respond. She thanked her and hung up. That night, she packed a bag and left the cottage. She didn't know where she was going, just that she couldn't stay. Not because she was afraid, but because she now understood something vital. The dead don't always haunt places. They haunt people. The connection she had forged through grief, love, obsession had left a mark. Not just on the house. On her. She wasn't sure if Daniel was gone, or if some part of him was still reaching out, caught between worlds. But she did know this. She had given him everything she could. It was time to let herself live. As she drove away from the woods, her reflection flickered briefly in the car's rearview mirror. Just her. Then, for a split second, another figure in the back seat. She didn't look again.